My first of the new Marvel Legends commemorating 60 years of Spidey has arrived, with a very steep price point. Is it worth it? 2022 celebrates 60 years of the wall crawler that everybody loves, Spider-Man. And there was no way that Hasbro was going to miss out on commemorating that with their own personal Legends line that was going to be able to center on Spider-Man. And as such, one of those figures was going to be a brand new reissue or remake, I guess you can kind of call it, because there's been other iterations of this particular version of Spidey before, but we're getting a brand new 6-inch Iron Spider. And finally, I came across him at a very distinct Target. It's funny because I already had a pre-order down for this guy, but I found him just out of the blue hanging around on one of the shelves in the home media section, and I couldn't pass him up, especially because of the brand new box that kind of caught my attention. Now, I know that the packaging for these new Marvel Legends is a point of contention. A lot of people like them, some people downright hate them. Personally, I kind of like them, but I understand if someone doesn't vibe with them. I totally get it. I totally understand if it's not your cup of tea as a collector or as a toy aficionado. But personally, there's just something about an overall coverage of the box that just kind of builds up a little bit of anticipation as you kind of take it out of the flap. You'll notice that it's boxed up and packaged in a somewhat unusual way. It's kind of wrapped up with this tissue paper and these cardboard pieces inside that are enclosing and almost like mummifying the figure inside. But overall, I gladly would take this over the twisty ties or those little pieces of plastic that you have to kind of tear off from some of the McFarlane toys that I have to deal with constantly on a regular basis. I like the Marvel Legends branding all around, some of the little staples to kind of commemorate the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man. Like I mentioned before, you can kind of see a little bit of that branding here and there. Anyways, moving on to the topic at hand, Iron Spider. We finally got a new version here, and it's one that I think a lot of people may have felt some form of reservations, considering that this is also one of the few Marvel Legends that are not only commemorating the 60th anniversary line, but it's also coming with a bit of a steep price tag, coming in at about on average $30. And I understand that for a 6-inch, that's quite demanding. But as soon as I pulled him out of the box, I am not gonna lie, I kind of started to feel a little bit as to why it is that they're upping the price just a tad bit. I'm not gonna full on excuse it, because overall you're still dealing with a sculpt and an overall build that we've seen before with other Marvel Legends. Right off the bat, you could see as far as dimensions, as far as musculature, and where you see the proportions here and there, that you've seen this Spidey before with different characterizations for different iterations of that character. If you've seen Ben Reilly Spidey, Symbiote Spidey, this is pretty much going to be that same body type. But where it stands out and what gives me the reasoning to somewhat understand where they're coming from with that higher price tag is the actual quality they used for the plastic this time around. Very difficult to articulate on camera, but as soon as I unwrapped him and felt him in hand from his mummification inside of that box, I was like, ooh, I feel the premium here. I actually feel some weight behind the plastic. It's almost like they're using a different style of filament or something else entirely. It's still technically plastic, but there's kind of like a rubberized coating to it all that not only gives it that Iron Spider sheen for the paint applications, but overall, he's got an added weight. I would argue that he's a few grams heavier than your typical Marvel Legends, and as such, moving him around and feeling him in hand actually has some kind of quality to him that feels different and made me realize, yeah, I think that $30 is going to stay in Marvel's bag, because I think I'm actually vibing with him quite an awful lot. And as you peek a little closer, you'll take apart the little characteristics that make him Iron Spider. Of course, he's going to be predominantly crimson red with the gold, which is one of my more attractive clashes, one of my favorite reasons as to why I love Iron Man. And of course, this is going to follow suit. It does look like they have like this coat over the painting of the parts that are red that you can see kind of look a little marbleized, and of course, very, very shiny as per the character, but it also, like I said before, it gives it that quality. Of course, Iron Spidey is not Iron Spidey without his claws here on the back, which you could see right there. What really makes up the characteristic that makes those claws the way that they are articulated towards Spidey is the little kind of prongs or spikes here amongst the back of the claws themselves, and they're very well sculpted. admittedly just a little bit on the bendy side that I would have liked them to. I would have liked that if they were going to be bendy, they would have come with some kind of wire filling inside to have a little bit of the posability with the claws stand in the place that there are, kind of like the way that some Dog Hawk figures have had in the past. Unfortunately, they don't fit that bill. They have specific points of articulation throughout the claws that bend at certain rigid areas, so you have to work with those particular points. And in between, you're going to have flimsy, I don't want to say flimsy, but bendy plastic that you think will stay in place, but it actually really doesn't. It just kind of floats back to its original position. And that's one thing that I would have had improved, is to have some kind of that wiry kind of bendability to them that allows better poses. And when you take them out of the box, you'll notice that two of the claws are molded to be exactly the same to each other, but one in particular has a different pose with the bottom part that's connected to his backpack here, and that's actually the one that's meant to be towards the bottom. So that's essentially how you plug them into the back piece here, and that's how you're supposed to have it sculpted. But of course, the ball joints at the base of each claw, as well as the hinge joints at two particular points of the overall claw, will allow you to kind of be a little bit flexible and creative as far as how you want them to be articulated, if you want them to be closed in, if you want them to be relaxed. But I think it could have been a little bit on the improved side, especially when you take into consideration real estate. You know, putting him up on the shelf is going to be potentially a little nuisance, considering that he's going to be taking up an awful lot of space around him if you want him to look badass or cool. Otherwise, you're going to have to fold everything downwards to have him give him kind of like this compact look. And also, looks a little suggestive to have certain claws kind of peeking from his groin area there. And since we're on the subject of articulation, let's talk about Spidey himself and the way that he's able to pose. So, as I mentioned before, he is pretty much a body type that you've seen being repainted countless times by Hasbro, which is what they're specialized in. And because of that, you're not really going to see anything that stands out as far as articulation and particular joints that they decided to go for here. So nothing to really write home about. As you can see, he's got that typical ball joint at the top of the head neck joint area there, as well as a hinge built inside that allows it to move inwards and outwards. Unfortunately, not much in the way of pivoting side to side, but the joint itself is very fluid as far as what it's able to really do. You got, of course, your typical ball joints at the top of the arm that allow it to rotate 360 degrees vertically, extend to the sides, and butterfly joints that do allow the shoulders to hinge forwards and outwards, but they're not the most flexible that I've seen on the Marvel Legends. Bicep joints that allow to rotate 360 degrees in place, as well as two joints at the elbows that are allowing the elbows to bend fully into the body. And then, of course, your ball joints and hinges at the wrists that allow 360 horizontal rotation, as well as being able to hunch in the wrist and the overall hand inwards and outwards. A torso hinge joint that actually has, I think, 3 points of ratchetiness. You can kind of hear a click every time you either crunch inwards or extend backwards, so it does feel kind of quality there, as well as a horizontal cut across the waist that allows the waist to have a ratcheted joint and move 360 degrees horizontally. Top leg joints that allow the leg to flex forwards about that far and only about that far back because of the way that the butt sculpt is generated there, but full extension to the sides, or at least almost there. It kind of stops at about 45 degrees. Horizontal swivels there at the top of the thigh, and then of course two joints at the knees. Granted, I don't know if this is an isolated incident. It could very well be, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, but mine are a little bit on the sticky side, specifically the one on the right. So much so that it actually still had a little bit of plastic residue coming off of it, so be forewarned, especially since these are kind of relatively hot off the truck if you do manage to find one locally. Once we get to the ankles, we got that typical ankle joint that they continue to use with some of these Spidey Marvel Legends that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of because of the way that you're able to pivot them downwards and upwards, sure, but the only way to really get the ankle rolling horizontally is to have the foot bent all the way downwards, and only then it happens. Otherwise, it's pretty much stuck. But fortunately, there is a boot cut at the top of that golden boot piece that allows the ankle and the overall foot to rotate 360 degrees. Now you'll notice that there's nothing really inherently special about the specific joints they used for this model version of Iron Spider, but where it really stands out and what made me think to myself, okay, this is the only little notch it's able to kick up on, is that the actual joints themselves, because of the way that they're using some higher quality plastic, it's a little weightier, it's a little bit sheenier on the plastic and on the paint applications. The joints themselves actually feel quality in retrospective. They actually feel good to move. Like I mentioned before, that torso joint actually clicks and feels really smooth, but also very weighty as you shift it forwards and backwards. And lifting the legs and swiveling the thighs, it actually feels not loose at all. It actually feels like something that is going to at least last me a good while, especially if we're going to be paying $30 a pop for some of these. With that said, I'm going to bring a very old-fashioned nitpick here, and that is accessories. Sure, we do get the trademark claws for an Iron Spider figure, but it would have been nice to have gotten some kind of web strand or web accessory of some form, or at least an extra pair of hands, because aside from the fisted hands that come default on the figure, he does come with 2 web shooting hands that you're able to swap in and out with. That's great and all, but at least I would have taken at the very, very bare minimum, an extra pair of some of those open hands that they've done in the past, only this time here. You could argue that maybe that's the sacrificial lamb we had to pay in order to get this level of quality behind the plastic, but for $30, I think they could have thrown in, like I said, a web accessory or at least that extra pair of open hands. So if you've been watching this review, taking a look at the figure itself and listening to what I've had to say, I appreciate it first and foremost, but I would definitely understand if you still think that $30, $31, $33, etc. is a little bit steep for a figure that's only about 6 inches. And trust me, I was kind of right there with you as I was driving home from that Target after finally finding him out in the wild. I was thinking to myself, well, the silver lining if I ended up not liking him is that I get to return him and save those $30. But as I played with him more and more, I thought to myself, damn it, it looks like I'm just gonna have to give those $30 up because I'm actually really digging this Iron Spidey figure. It may not be for everyone, and if you're on a budget, I totally understand that he may not be a must-have, especially with that steep price point. But if by some chance you happen to have the money, or you're able to haggle for him at some kind of vendor or trade show, what have you, then he's definitely worth the attempt of trying to add him to your collection. So though I might not be condoning that price point, I'm also not gonna fully condemn the figure either, and that's why I'm gonna be giving it a 7 out of 10. And yes, I understand how saying that kind of puts me in a little bit of a hypocritical light, considering my most recent video where I pretty much contest the idea of an $100 No Way Home 3-pack exclusive to Hasbro Pulse, because this pretty much mirrors that exact same price point. But here's the thing, if those figures from the No Way Home 3-pack are going to have the same level of quality and premium weighted feel behind the plastic utilized in those figures, then maybe there's a discussion or argument that we can have. And if you guys are in the market to pick up Iron Spider, he is available over at Big Bad Toy Store. There's going to be a link in the description. You guys don't have to use it, but it would help out the channel quite an awful lot, and you guys can bring him home to commemorate 60 years of Spider-Man. In the comment section, I want you guys to answer this question. Do you think that these new wave of Marvel Legends to celebrate 60 years of Spidey are worth it with the new price tag, considering that they do upscale the quality of the plastic a bit, or do you think that it's still being a little too stingy with the pricing of these things? Let me know in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this review, let me know by hitting the thumbs up button. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down, subscribe for more Spidey and Batman content coming up here in the future. And as always, guys, stay humble.